I would suggest that we start with your actually with the conversation we had with you before about your idea to describe the hashtag of responsible listeners in a way which is really very exciting to discover for me personally, and it's a very personal perspective of you. And maybe you can describe a little bit more in detail how you arrived to this idea of describing this mission statement as a unifying concept. That would be very great for everybody to know.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be good also to hear, make sure people's response is positive about it. I mean, one thing I don't know if I mentioned it to you, I did talk to someone the other day. This guy, I may have mentioned him, Rupert Strachwitz. Is that name familiar to you?
Yes, I heard about it.
He runs this group called the Maisenata Stiftung.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a think tank about NGOs and philanthropy and things like that. And I mentioned it to him. I know he's a music lover. And he said, that's interesting. You say that responsible listeners. He said, sometimes, when I go to hear classical music, I just want to relax. I don't want to be engaged, So just for example, that's like one thought. I don't think it's, and I think there's a response to that too. But I think as like we said, a unifying concept, I think it brings together a lot of what you're talking about.
And how did you understand from the very beginning, like the unifying element? I mean, in which sense listening?
Well, I think it's just the fact that there are many different pieces of between the Conference of the Birds and the Silk Road Cultural Belt and the orchestra and these other sort of ideas that you've put out in the world, that it's not that it's just a little hard to sometimes pull it together. And I think that's why I think that this is sort of this idea of response that you can say that Kalias Foundation promotes responsible listening, that's the goal of this organization, is to have a more engaged kind of experience with music, as you're calling it, responsible listening. So that's I think how I see it.
And from your personal background and your also professional background, how is the idea and the ability or the skill and the position of listening, how did you experience that, and what role did it play in your?
What's also important is that, as you were saying, when we talked about it the other day, is that listening is not something that most of us are good at. We're not trained to be good listeners. Very few of us have that skill, and it is in this day and age when the world has become, there are a lot of challenging issues going on in the world. It's more about, saying what I want and me, and and very sort of not really listening often to what others are saying around us. So I think the idea of active listening and being more engaged listeners is a really important skill, and that if through this work that you're doing, we're able to build that a little bit, even in this small, in a small way, I think that that's going to be, a helpful contribution to not just in terms of music, but in terms of how we communicate in the world.
And how do you understand the element of dialogue in this context? Like dialogue in the sense of someone sending a message and the other like adressant and adressat, like right. in relation to listening, like and in relation to responsibility, like what does that mean for you?
Well, I think it's part of dialogue. Implies that there's listening going on, right? You can't have a dialogue if just one person is talking is speaking. Mm-hmm. You need to have a second person there, and you need to have some sort of engagement to call it a dialogue. Otherwise, it's a monologue, you know, it's the theater,
Yeah.
you know, right? You know, and it's not leading towards any greater I don't know, understanding or something like that.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for Daniel to to join us.
Okay.
Just. Yeah, he's coming in a moment.
Okay. By the way, I'll try to write up something for tomorrow just about this meeting on the 22nd, and with some thoughts about that, and then sort of next steps.
Great.
Yeah. So just I'll put it sort of like on paper, at least sort of like what I think with an agenda and what we'd like to see happen.
Wonderful.
Okay, and then we can talk about it.
Let's like for this, in this context, let's really focus on the, because this will be a public also for an opportunity for different audiences and for our friends, supporters of the Sacred Symphony to learn more about actually the idea we are promoting and we are working on and we are developing, and to learn more about the people who are involved to make this happen. And so it's really like to start with you. It's very valuable to really to dig into the idea of responsibility and listening from your very personal background, and you coming from the States, being educated at the Columbia University, and also working at Bard College, and working with so many different organizations all over the world. It would be really interesting, I think, for many, not only for me, to know more how you would apply the idea of responsible listeners to your working field, to your field of expertise. I mean, we are focusing on the musical and the artistic idea, but still the whole concept works through the interaction and also the dialogue between different disciplines.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing here is sort of bringing, how do you say, that there's a there's almost a I would say therapeutic is the right word, but there's some additional quality, there are additional benefits per se of what music can do for people, and I think this is what you're exploring. I mean, that's not something I think you would promote per se, but I think it can be of interest, say, if in terms of funders or something like that, who have an interest in how music can help us be more fully realized people, or help address problems in the world, or help address issues with with fostering communication and dialogue. I think that's certainly an opportunity.
And if we're getting very specific, I mean, if we take one source of inspiration on the Silk Road Cultural Belt, for example, like I share this as one source of inspiration from a person his name is Rohan Bose. He's from Kolkata, from India, and he shared this very, very beautiful source of inspiration of a music which is called, like they call it in Indian, it's called Raga Kaunsi Bhairav in Damar on Sarod, like very, for me, like very, very new idea. With it's Indian classical music.
Right.
He described the quality, or the silk, as we call it, of this source of inspiration of this music following way. He says, this is a piece of silk because it's celebrating Gothicism. So when we have such an explanation like it's celebrating Gothicism,
Mm-hmm.
for me it's a very, very new idea of describing a basic quality of music. I mean, first of all, Gothicism is a new term for me.
Mm-hmm.
And how you, I mean, if you take such a personal source of inspiration, like which came from a responsible listener from India,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe this kind of dialogue, which is online,
Mm-hmm.
but which is also still there is the offline dialogue, like we are talking, we started a conversation on it.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe that, and what is the benefit of such a purpose or such a approach?
Well, I think it's stimulating. I think that's the idea. Is that I think also is that you're making this a very egalitarian kind of process here, where you're reaching out to people around the world for their views and ideas, and that then inspires the programs and ideas that you're developing, for live in live productions, or in for online. So I think it is. I think it's almost like a crowdsourcing kind of idea, but also if it can also stimulate dialogue with others, I think that's fantastic too.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, have you discovered this specific source of inspiration? I think it's somewhere. It's in the. I mean, if you look on it, it's in the middle of the desert. I think it's east from the Caspian Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, have you personally reached out to some of these sources of inspiration, which like audiences and listeners have shared on the Circuit Cultural Belt? Like, would you at the moment like approach this to get some ideas and to learn or to have a dialogue actually?
I mean, I've looked at it more just to help you in this process, but I haven't I don't think that I have per se. I think it's, but it's also, I don't think in some ways I've been asked to do that. And I think that's also part of the outreach that we have to think about with this, is like getting that motor going, because I think if people don't know about it, then they won't do it, so it's getting the motor of, outreach and communications developed too, I think. Yeah.
I mean, I'm very, very excited about this. For me, it's since we launched it in February 2016. I mean, any source of inspiration which is on the Circuit Cultural Belt at the moment is for me is really a source of source for reflection, to learn, to widen my knowledge, but I try to understand why this kind of approach is for so many people still like not understandable. Like they say, I don't understand it. And how would you describe the challenge or the obstacle we have to overcome, or we have to help a broader audience to discover this potential, or this dialogue, this richness, diversity, or however you call it?
I think it's about just expanding out from the people who have been we've reached out to so far, and then it's creating the sense of community among them, which I think they probably just feel like, some of them might feel that way, but I don't know if they do, if they all do, and having a sense of like as a community of responsible listeners around the world, so that using the metaphor of the Silk Road conversation. Yeah. So I think
if I understand you right, it's very much about also about the framing, about the wording, how you how to communicate the idea itself in a way that it's more approachable, more understandable.
Right. And I think, yes, it's nice to, have this big, to have all these thoughts about it, but now to continue, and this is the hard part. This is what, even, commercial and well, all kinds of, and advocates, who are using the internet are struggle with is like, how do you keep people interested and engaged and, keeping them, to come back to, to share their experiences. And that's why it's, that it worked.
George? Hello?
Hello.
There you are. Yeah, just stop for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's fascinating to observe that in this regard, the internet and the possibilities of the internet in relation to a subject like classical music, and the George, are you there?
Hello.
Okay.
Again. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Just the monitor was stopping.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we're back. Okay.
Yeah. That the potential to try or to develop completely new forms of dialogue through the internet and with the help of the internet is still like in the world of classical music, when it comes to audience participation, to involve listeners in global dialogue, is still very new. I mean, to take another example, like there is a beautiful source of inspiration from her name is Persephone from Lipari, from Sicily in Italy. And she shared a very beautiful source of inspiration. It's Transfigured Night from Arnold Schönberg. And she describes it in French. This is a piece of silk because, and then there's she describes with in French. How would you see the challenge of the language barrier? I mean, English as an international language is a basic tool to make this an idea like this happen. But how do you see the challenge with the language barrier? That's still, in Germany there's German, and France, French, Chinese, Japanese. How?
Yeah. I mean, it is an issue. It is. If you're going to make it something that's just where people can just respond in English, it is going to limit you in some ways. However, it is becoming, obviously we know, more of an international language. But, there are some tools, that some of these, sites, do have for like immediate translations and things like that. I don't know so much about that, but I think it's something you can look into. Maybe even with Google about, how to develop that.
And in general, how do you see this with when it comes to classical music? Classical music is a very specific, very personal idea. And you have the Eurocentric perspective. You have, for example, the Indian classical music perspective, or the African classical music. How do you see this as in relation to responsible listeners?
Well, I think that's the thing. It's if you're gonna, it's how broad we want to set, this table in a way, and I think it sounds like you want to be very broad about it, which is and inclusive, which is good, So I think but I think if you want to keep engaging, people from around the world, especially, online, there's things have to be what you're talking about has to have some relevance to to most people. I mean, if you start just talking about one style or one kind of music, I think you're going to probably limit people. But I think it's just good. I think that what it seems like you created something where people can talk about whatever it is that inspires them.
Mm.